Mount Everest is covered in bodies. Some are hidden beneath snow and ice. Others remain fully visible beside the climbing routes. Frozen hands still emerge from the mountain decades after death. Faces preserved by the cold continue staring across the Himalayas long after the climbers themselves disappeared from the world. And in some parts of Everest, the dead have become landmarks, markers used by other climbers to navigate the mountain. More than 300 people have died attempting to reach the summit of Mount Everest. Many of them were never brought home, not because rescuers refused, but because the mountain itself made recovery almost impossible. Above a certain altitude on Everest, the human body begins dying slowly, even while still alive. Oxygen levels collapse, decision-making deteriorates, hallucinations begin, simple movement becomes exhausting, every step feels heavier than the last. Climbers call this region the death zone, and inside the death zone, the mountain keeps many of its dead forever. For decades, Mount Everest represented the ultimate human achievement, the highest point on Earth, a place where climbers push beyond ordinary human limits, searching for glory, survival, meaning, or obsession. But Everest is not only a mountain, it is also a graveyard. The journey toward the summit begins long before climbers ever touch the mountain itself. Teams travel across dangerous terrain through Nepal or Tibet, carrying enormous amounts of equipment, food, oxygen tanks, climbing ropes, medical supplies, heavy cold weather gear designed for temperatures cold enough to freeze exposed skin within minutes. At Everest Base Camp, thousands of climbers gather beneath the shadow of the mountain every year. Colorful tents spread across ice and rock, while helicopters echo through the thin Himalayan air. For some climbers, reaching base camp already feels like an achievement, but the real danger begins higher above. Far above the clouds, Everest becomes something else entirely. The air grows thinner with every step. Weather changes instantly. Winds strong enough to throw climbers off the mountain can appear without warning. Temperatures plunge far below freezing, even during daylight, and every movement demands enormous physical effort. Above 26,000 feet, climbers enter the death zone. At that altitude, the human body cannot survive for long. There is not enough oxygen for normal function. The body begins shutting down slowly. Cells die. Judgment weakens. The brain struggles to process reality correctly. Even experienced climbers describe the death zone as entering another world. Some hallucinate voices. Others hear footsteps behind them where nobody exists. Many lose the ability to think clearly while exhaustion consumes their bodies. Some bodies remain hidden beneath snow. Others sit exposed beside climbing routes for decades. One of the most famous became known simply as Green Boots. The body rested inside a limestone cave near the summit route for years. Climbers passed the corpse constantly while ascending toward the top of Everest. The bright green climbing boots became so recognizable that many mountaineers used the body itself as a navigation marker. Turn left at Green Boots. The phrase sounded almost unreal, but on Everest, death eventually becomes part of the landscape. Many bodies cannot be recovered because rescue itself becomes too dangerous. At extreme altitude, even lifting a few pounds feels exhausting. Recovering a body can require large teams risking their own lives inside the death zone. Helicopters struggle to operate at such altitude. Weather shifts rapidly, and exhausted climbers often lack enough strength to save themselves, let alone someone else. As a result, many who die on Everest remain exactly where they fell. Some disappear beneath snow for years before reappearing again after storms shift the ice. Others remain preserved almost perfectly by the freezing temperatures. Bright jackets still visible, faces frozen beneath layers of ice, gloves still gripping climbing ropes long after death. One climber who passed several bodies near the summit later described the experience as psychologically terrifying. He said the dead did not look peaceful. They looked paused, as if the mountain had frozen human beings in the middle of movement itself. Perhaps the most disturbing part of Everest is that many climbers continue walking past dying people during summit attempts, not always because they are cruel, but because at extreme altitude, Saving another person may become physically impossible. In 1996, Everest experienced one of the deadliest disasters in its history. Commercial expedition groups attempted reaching the summit during worsening weather conditions. As climbers descended, a violent storm engulfed the mountain. Visibility collapsed, temperatures plummeted, hurricane-force winds swept across the summit ridge. Some climbers became stranded high above the mountain in complete darkness. Others lost oxygen supplies. Several froze to death while trying to descend. The disaster shocked the world after best-selling books and survivor accounts revealed what happened near the summit. One climber named Beck Weathers became separated from his team during the storm. Exhausted and nearly frozen to death, he was eventually abandoned because others believed he could no longer survive. But hours later, against all expectation, Weathers regained consciousness and somehow staggered back toward camp through the storm, despite catastrophic frostbite and snow blindness. He survived. Others did not. The 1996 disaster exposed something uncomfortable about Everest. The summit had become an obsession powerful enough to override common sense. Some climbers continued upward even after conditions became deadly. Others refused turning back despite exhaustion and worsening weather, because on Everest, the summit can begin feeling more important than survival itself. That obsession still exists today. Modern technology has made Everest more accessible than ever before. Commercial expeditions now guide climbers from around the world toward the summit each year, but the mountain remains just as deadly. In recent years, photographs from Everest shocked the internet after showing enormous traffic jams near the summit. Long lines of climbers waited for hours inside the death zone, while oxygen supplies slowly disappeared. Some died while standing in line beneath the summit ridge. Others collapsed during descent after using too much energy waiting near the top. The mountain does not care whether someone is experienced or wealthy. It kills beginners, experts, young climbers, veterans. Everest treats all human beings the same, and still, people continue climbing. Why? For some, Everest represents personal transformation. For others, it becomes obsession, a need to prove something larger than ordinary life, to stand at the highest point on Earth and survive. But the mountain has a price, and sometimes that price remains visible for decades. There are stories across Everest of climbers encountering frozen bodies unexpectedly through snowstorms. Some report seeing dead climbers illuminated by moonlight near the summit. Others describe the psychological horror of stepping around corpses while struggling to stay alive themselves. Inside the death zone, the line between life and death becomes frighteningly thin. Many climbers who survived Everest later described the experience not as inspiring, but deeply unsettling, because the mountain forces people into impossible situations. Continue upward toward the summit while another climber collapses nearby. Turn back after years of preparation and enormous financial cost. Risk your own oxygen helping someone who may already be dying. There are no easy answers at extreme altitude. The mountain strips away comfort. Morality becomes survival. Movement becomes suffering. Even breathing becomes difficult. And above everything, the dead remain waiting silently in the snow. Perhaps no image captures Everest more clearly than the sight of colorful climbing suits moving slowly past frozen bodies beneath the clouds. Human ambition climbing directly beside human mortality. One climber later described reaching the summit not as triumph, but as relief. Relief that the mountain had allowed him to leave alive. Today, Mount Everest remains one of the most dangerous places on Earth. And despite decades of disaster, people still dream of reaching the summit every year. Some succeed, others never return. Storms continue burying bodies beneath snow and ice, while new climbers ascend toward the top. The mountain remains cold, silent, indifferent, and somewhere high above the clouds, frozen climbers still rest beside the routes leading toward the summit of the world. Waiting in the snow forever.